Hello, everyone. Good morning from Australia, and good day, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. I'm Ayya Jitindriya. I share doing these meditations with Samaneri Jayasara, and she'll be along in 2 weeks' time to do the next one. So I hope everyone is well, and that you've made use of the time that we've had a break over this last little while to tune into the live day retreat that we did online and is archived online. So today, for those of you who might be new to this channel, I'm going to offer a guided meditation, which will be for about 30 minutes, and then maybe 30 to 40 minutes with some reflections. And then we'll open up the chat for some live Q&A. Okay, so without too much more time, why don't we jump into it? Jump into this present moment, jump into this live meditation with full awareness. So just going to adjust some things here. I haven't checked. I presume everyone can hear and see me okay. There aren't any problems arising in the chat box. Great, thank you. Very good. So let's settle into this opportunity for meditation. Maybe just a few reflections to help us enter into the space. It's not that we're not in the place where we need to be, the time, the place, the space. Where we already are is exactly where we're going to be. But this process we call meditation is a mode of coming out of distraction, of relaxing out of habitual and perhaps neurotic movements of mind that tend to cause us stress, unnecessary suffering, and keep us in a bit of a spin, or keep the movement of mind happening in a way that we don't see clearly what's going on. So meditation isn't, although it is taught in many different ways as a technique, we utilize what we have, this body-mind, as a way of just coming into presence. So we don't want to modulate this mind, change it to become something other, but to settle into this present moment more and more. Now, technically we can't escape this present moment, but what happens is our attention gets drawn into thoughts, thinking, story making over and over again. And those stories, those habitual mental constructions with all their various components, if we're not awake to the process, can cause us a lot of suffering, grief. So, first of all, recognize your own awareness in this time, in this place, exactly where you are. Recognizing this basis of awareness is very central to the meditation process and the waking up process, if we call it a process. Again and again, we'll habitually forget this present moment awareness. So the meditation is to wake up, literally, in this moment. Recognize, remember this innate, present awareness. Referred to by many different words in different traditions. But awareness is perhaps the word, the descriptor that speaks directly to me and is quite consistent across all traditions. Presence, simple beingness. To bring our attention to this, not in a stressful way, not in a way that we try to keep it there, hold it there, but simply recollecting, remembering, and resting into that. You can do this with your eyes open or closed, whatever suits you. You can experiment with either. And within this awareness, the various sense experiences come and go. Sound, thoughts, sensations, and we start to see more clearly just by being present how this mind moves with thinking, thoughts, ideas, imagination, and how thoughts give rise to other thoughts, memories, perceptions, feelings, emotion. This is the movement of, we can say, the movement of the mind or the movement of mentality, conditioned mental movement. We simply just notice how it is, each of us in our own direct experience. And waking up to just that. And waking up to recognize this ever-present awareness. So if you're relatively new to this kind of meditation practice, or depending on what's going on for you in your life at this time, what's been stimulated in your day, you may encounter the mind moving quite significantly. Or you may be able to recognize awareness and allow the mind to rest in that space without too much interference with thoughts and memories, etc. But however it is for you, just recognize it's like this right now. Recognize the mind, the movement of mind that wants to get something or get rid of something or hang on to something. All of that, in whichever way it moves, is just movement, habitual movement. And we wake up to that. Rest out of that if you feel caught up in it. But just the recognition, in fact, the waking up itself in that moment to what is, allows the resting out, the dispersal. The waking up in that moment, in this moment, to habitual movement is the destruction of delusion, confusion. Now, this doesn't mean that no movement happens when the mind is at rest, because sense experience still comes and goes. But the difference is the awareness, the full awareness, full mindfulness, and the not grasping. Once the mind learns how to rest out, it doesn't habitually grasp or fixate on sense impression. It doesn't habitually identify with experience. Just allows things to be as they are. And what can help you find a centeredness in this continuity of awareness, both initially but also intermittently or throughout the practice, is connecting with the sensations of the in and out breath, which are just naturally there, though we don't tend to notice them. Allowing those sensations into awareness or expanding awareness to connect with these sensations of the natural movement of breathing. This is a centering device, a technique of sorts, just to help the mind relax out of thinking. And also helps the body to calm and relax, which has that effect of helping the mind to similarly calm and relax. So directly perceiving the movement of the breath through bodily sensation, feeling the breath coming in through the nostrils, expanding the chest and abdomen, and again feeling the cascade of sensations with the out breath. Each new breath, each new moment is fresh. Don't try to grasp the breath with attention. We just know it as it appears through these sensations. So we just use the breath as a centering device, a connecting experience to presence. But we still learn to stabilize attention by recognizing awareness itself, ever present, whether perceiving an object of mind or not. Relaxing any doing energy that arises, that habitual, directed tension that wants to fix something or hold something or create something, get rid of something, thinks it needs to be somewhere else doing something else, resisting the present moment just as it is. That's just the habitual movement of the seeking mind. It's good to know this, to see it in action and relax out of it. Learning to relax this body and mind in the face of whatever is happening for us. So remember that the meditation is this awareness itself. Whether we say learning to rest into awareness or recognize awareness, mindfulness, presence, establishing mindfulness or presence, connecting with this present moment, resting in the natural openness of mind itself. All these different ways we might articulate what that is. So words are just different shapes, sounds, and pointers to help our mind awaken to this natural state. Inevitably, thoughts and images of our life will flash up, pass through the mind. And some of them will notice how they feel more me and mine, or the problem I have to deal with more than others. And this gives the flavor of what we call identification. Just to know that as it is, our mind's attention can get completely funneled into one thought, concept, idea, or energy formation. And various emotions or memories or concerns may be triggered as a consequence. That's just how it is. That's how the conditioned mind manifests. How grasping, fixation, reification, identification happens. But that which knows and sees this as it happens is already free of that. Is not entangled in that. To fully recognize this, wisdom begins to grow and release the mind. This quality of awareness that we learn to recognize and rest in. It's always fresh, always present. And there's no past awareness to find or future awareness to secure. Past and future are mere movements of conceptual mind. Whatever experiences arise of pleasure or pain, they're just other movements of mind or expressions of mind in one form or another. And we may notice arising with them some subtle preferencing, wanting this, not wanting that. Very subtle movement of attachment or the push-pull, habitual push-pull of mind, of attention. No need to do anything, but just notice. It's the wisdom mind that wakes up to see more and more of the various levels of experience that appear and disappear. You don't really have to do anything about it, but allow this natural knowing, natural seeing, this awareness, bare awareness to do its thing. Just simply clarifying more and more. So as we begin to draw this meditation to a close, the mind doesn't have to close down. I'm simply going to shift from giving guidance and space to answering questions that arise. The meditation as such, in terms of innate awareness, never ends. Our recognition of it may come and go and falter somewhat. But our path is really just learning to wake up, recognize and rest into this more and more. So, whatever's happening in your own heart and mind, let's come into this space of this connecting space of the internet and the live stream right now. And we have the opportunity for some Q&A. So feel free to put any questions into that chat box, and I'll do my best to respond to them. So we did about 40 minutes of meditation. So our first question is from Reverend Dillis. She says, in a conflict in our monastery where I have to choose a side, how do I do the best for everyone concerned? Well, my first thought, Reverend, is that do you have to choose a side? Is there a way to allow the mind to be open and not actually choose this or that? This is just a reflection. In actuality, it may be something in the monastery that is put to a vote in the community, so one does have to, unless one abstains, vote for one way or another. And I guess this is just something personal that yourself or each person in such a situation needs to just reflect on. For myself, when I feel like I have to make a decision about something, choose one way or another, or I often, if I have the opportunity, will just tell myself to sleep on it. Particularly if it's not, 100% clear, just sleep on it. If you have the opportunity just to give it time and space like that without engaging in too much thinking, but let those processes settle, then for myself, I often find something clarifies by the morning or in a couple of days as to which way the energy needs to move or is moving already, despite the conceptual proliferation leading up to that. There's something quite wonderful that can happen after a night of sleep and with the new daybreak to bring clarity, which isn't a conceptual process. And I've learnt to trust that in my life and to wake up when I'm struggling with doubt and the feeling of having to work things out or choose learning. And that often will, in the past, can become more intense at night, which is very interesting, in the dark. If I just learn to let it go, sleep on it, something fresh comes through in the morning. So that's my reflections, Reverend. You'll need to find your own way in this, but maybe those reflections help. The other aspect, of course, your concern is to do the best for everyone concerned, is always to try and hold the process with a heart of loving kindness and unbiasedness, non-preferentiality. And a beautiful image for this is the sun that shines on all things impartially. gives its light to all things. It doesn't mean that some days the clouds are here and one doesn't feel the rays directly, but behind those clouds, the sun isn't choosing, I'll shine here today and not there tomorrow. So, Eric is asking a question. I work in a corporate culture that is very demanding. How can I bring more presence to this type of environment, since our surroundings directly influence the mind? You know, as I was indicating in that particular guidance, presence, awareness is always there. It's not, we have a way of languaging things, habitually languaging things in a way that we think, how can I bring more of it here? Which I totally understand, bring more presence, more mindfulness to the situation. We talk like that. But actually, if we can recognize that awareness is ever present, despite whatever's happening in the environment, whether it's corporate or leisure, whether it's busy or relaxed, awareness is always present. But what happens often in the busy and demanding environment is, yes, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of expectation, a lot of doing energy, which is natural to this environment. And our attention often is just 100% funneled into, or habitually funneled into, these more conceptual processes without this kind of, what do they call it, a kind of meta-awareness, something that recognizes what's happening at the same time. So this is all we need to practice, if you like, is to recognize that awareness is ever present. And we can recognize busyness, the feeling of busyness, of pressure, of the feeling of much to do, of having to concentrate and focus. These things aren't contrary to the fact of awareness itself. But it's a bit like learning to dance. Sometimes, you know, we really have to practice how to be aware while we learn all these different movements of body and mind and the shifting of attention to here, to there. We simultaneously recognize awareness, or just, you know, awareness is not separate from that. Whatever we're perceiving or conceiving, awareness is there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this knowing of the concept, the thought, of the activity. But the difference in being so swept into that it's stressful is, in my understanding, and in one way of saying it, is this recognition that ever-present awareness is nowhere else. So see how that settles in for you. I'm just trying to find that question again. It depends perhaps how experienced you are in this type of meditation. When we do formal sitting meditation, obviously there's no external pressure. We're just dealing with the momentum of the mind that might have a lot of internal pressures or not. But this is our practice ground, if you like, in what we call relatively optimum circumstances as we practice. It's a bit like training wheels, learning how to ride a bike with training wheels. But when you're at work or in your daily life, you know, the training wheels are off and we've got to pay a lot more attention and stay with how things are. What can be helpful is this increased body awareness. So as we learn to pay attention to the breath in our meditation, or recognize what's happening with the breath, and when it gets stressed and shallow, and when we learn to relax and it becomes smooth and easeful, we recognize those movements of tensing and stress and how to relax that. And this can become very, it's like a new level of awareness we can bring into our life that's non-conceptual. We learn to recognize when body's tensing and we naturally relax. We start to see how the mind and the body are actually influencing each other in this way. So bringing awareness of breath and body into your work environment is, as in the meditation, it is a device to help stay connected and will serve you well. Alex says, is there a point when resting in awareness happens all the time while involved in the daily activities? The masters tell us there is, and that's the stabilization of the recognition of awareness. And it doesn't mean that the mind isn't moving, things don't happen. It's just that at that point, all things are seen just as they are. They come and go. If we're in a social or work situation, body-mind is responding appropriately, but without any sense of grasping or fixation on that which is coming and going, to the point where we lose a sense of connection with presence, with awareness. So one could surmise that this point is the full awakening, once there's such full stabilization, and there, even with things coming and going, there's no more attachment or disturbance or ignorance, basically. Wisdom has fruited or developed, matured so much that mind just knows exactly what this stuff is and is not, whether it's pleasant or painful, is not, it has to deal with it, but there is no identification or attachment. So having said that, this is the surmising, and I hear from the teaching of the masters who are fully realized there is that level of stabilization and full comprehension of the nature of mind, the nature of the conditioned, the unconditioned. For wherever we're at, what we need to be careful of is just the mind that conceptualizes what that might be like and then tries to aim at that experience, force it, make it happen. You know, this is conceptual mind, this is a mind under ignorance and attachment. The masters always say that this experience happens naturally through insight. But our practice is, of course, to recognize this ever-present awareness more and more, or to come out of the stuckness or fixation on particular movements of mind. Emotionality doesn't mean we don't have emotions, but we get stuck in them. Our ignorance is not fully cleared, that we see them as just merely part of the flow of karmic energy. So I hope that answers your question. Tom is saying, I would love to hear your story of how you've chosen your path. I think I haven't really chosen it. It's kind of just been in the flow of things. Perhaps karmically. There's many places. In fact, if you go on our website, there's, rather than go into it now because a lot of people have heard it, the story, but there's a couple of videos you'll find in the posts, in past posts. You can click on videos in the posts sections and you'll find a couple of interviews there, some with Samaneri Jayasara, some with myself. And the questioners, the interviewers, ask all about our path and practice and all of that. So you might be interested, many of you might be interested to go and have a look at that. It'd be probably more informing than me touching on anything here. So I hope that's okay, Tom. Gives you something to follow up. I'll go to vivekahermitage.com. So Amy's asking, can you speak to the difference between discernment and judgment? So these are, two different English words, and they can be used in different contexts. So sometimes discernment can hint at a kind of judgment. But discernment quite often is a word that, an English word that is used to translate, say, a Pali or Sanskrit word that means wisdom. Even viveka can, in Sanskrit, in Advaita teachings and Vedic teachings, gets translated as discernment, whereas viveka in the Pali will most often get translated as solitude, seclusion, or detachment. But they're connected in some way within the stream of wisdom. So when I talk about discernment, it's like a clarity of mind that can discern what's actually happening. When I talk about judgment, it's a habitual process of mind, that preferences, that has learned to judge. I want this, I don't want this, because this I perceive as bad, this I perceive as good, which leads to the wanting and not wanting. And often that judgment is just a habitual, conditioned process of mind, which is actually chopping things up, and it feeds into the dualistic perceptual processes and keeps us in a state of unsatisfactoriness. Whereas discernment in the stream of wisdom learns to see judgment as judgment and to let it go or not indulge it. As a habitual activity of mind, it may still arise, but we discern that, that's the judging mind. And most of us have some kind of super ego conditioning where there's this kind of overlord, judgmental overlord, that tells us, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And we may have some, emotional reactivity within that, depending on our conditioning. Yeah, so that's the way I see those two words. When I'm creating designs, sewing clothing, I feel like my mind is so focused that it feels like I'm meditating and not thinking about what I'm doing. Is this meditation or just focused attention? Well, you could call it both or either, because that's the essence of, say, meditation, is that one is so present that the factors of mindfulness and samadhi are there. And, mindfulness, presence of mind, samadhi is a kind of a concentration or a full focus, such that thoughts aren't intervening anymore. It's just what some people in a creative process talk about, just being in the flow. So these are factors of mind that emerge: mindfulness, samadhi, and this usually being in this state is quite pleasant. There's a degree of sukha, happiness or sense of well-being, joy, even energy that comes from that. So these are actually factors of meditation, and can be experienced exactly as you say when we're quite focused on a project. The only difference, I would say, is in the recognition of what's happening. But I think, in the situation you're describing, now, when I'd say recognition, it's not a separating out, but such a presence that knows, even in meditation or whether your creativity, it's so present, it just knows what's there. In meditation, it can become a more subtle knowing of the different subtle experiences of mind that still come and go. In my experience, when you're involved in an activity, there may not be that kind of overview, for want of a better word. But nevertheless, the experience of that can cultivate and reinforce those wholesome factors: mindfulness, samadhi, etc. So you could say it's a focused attention and also a kind of meditation. Phoebe says, the recent death of my brother and grandfather is weighing on the relationship of my parents. They're growing apart and can't seem to find any consolence from each other. How can I help them? Yeah, sometimes people's grief can come between them. So my first sense in response to this is that if you can help your parents process the grief, the feelings of loss or confusion, that this may help. It may mean that if you have such a relationship where you can just spend time with perhaps one of them individually at a time and just talk, what are you feeling, what's going on? I mean, not as an invasive kind of inquiry, but just allowing them the space, helping them to feel comfortable enough to start to articulate some of what they're feeling and experiencing. And from your perspective, it's not looking for solutions or giving wise advice per se, but listening. Your quality of listening is really key, and just to accept whatever they are able to articulate. Whether you are able to make time to do this with each one individually or both together, my sense is that this could help heal or disperse some of what's coming between them. What comes between us in relationship is often what is unspoken, and any kind of suppressed or repressed emotion, projections onto each other, that unprocessed grief or emotion becomes something for an individual that they tense around and shut down around. The pain, this is part of the process of grief, but a gentle allowing them to open, and that talking, if you have a relationship whereby you can allow that, and your wholehearted, compassionate listening, so they can start to breathe out with that. Now, whether or not it's suitable or they'd be interested, on our website I have a series of meditations, and one is on working with grief, processing grief. It may not be languaged in a way that you have a listen to it yourself. The series is called Working with Challenging Emotions. I think the last one is about working with grief. And if you have a listen to it yourself, you will recognize whether you think it may interest your parents or not. So, but also just your own compassion and kindness towards them. As much as you think of it through the day, when you think of their pain or their grief, open your own heart to that. Listen to that pain or grief that you feel as a child, their child. You'll feel that. If you can open to and listen to that and breathe with that, and in your imagination, allow your love and compassion to flow to them, to allow their own grief to open, hearts to open to that grief. That will help in seen and unseen ways. Is it possible to live a life without a process of constructing, mental constructing? From my perspective, I don't think so. But the difference between an unawakened experience and an awakened experience of that is that the awakened mind knows mental construction as mental construction. It's impermanent. It's not self. It's a habitual process. And, in a life in this world, there are things we have to think about. We have to use our mind to engage at various levels. But the difference between the unawakened mind and the awakened mind is knowing exactly what's happening, and the non-identification, the non-attachment, the non-fixatedness on those things. The mental continuum, in terms of the conditioned mental continuum, is a constructing process. It has its own momentum. It's a karmic momentum. But if we're identified with that, we get caught up and spin with it and suffer because of it. The awakened mind knows it exactly as it is. We engage it when it's necessary, not engage it when not necessary. That's my understanding. So mental constructions are part of the khandhas, what's called the 5 khandhas, which the Buddha taught us to recognize and see them for what they are. And, it's the khandhas that are functioning together that let's say are the processes of this mental and bodily existence. So they'll be around until we pass away. But for the enlightened person passing away, there's no more uptake of khandhas, no more rebirth, if you like. Hi Jitindriya, thanks for this meditation, also for your meditations on the Waking Up app, which have been important, very important during this challenging time of my life. Do you have any tips for sleeping for someone with chronic anxiety and a very busy mind? Well, as you probably know, Waking Up, Jayasara and myself have some meditations for sleep up there as well. But these are just, some audios that might help. If there are underlying conditions, and I've experienced this, I do experience this as well. If there are other conditions, we need to address that with sleep or the inability to sleep and to rest. There's so many things that can affect our sleep these days. And I'm just gonna say a few things that have been important for me. Diet. I've found that particular additives in foods really affect my sleep badly. Certain preservatives, liquid sugars, high fructose stuff, and often any sugar, particularly any stimulants, caffeine, other stimulants, obviously screen time. I am very restricted. I can't do screen time after the sun goes down. I can't do more than a few hours a day in terms of it not affecting my ability to rest well. But I have to be very careful about what I ingest. I find some preservatives in particular that are everywhere in food, pharmaceuticals, creams, so many things. I have to be very aware because I've found that they can keep my body in a certain state that's not conducive to rest. So you have to do a lot of inquiry. You might talk about it as chronic anxiety in a busy mind, but I've found that particularly sugars and various kinds of stimulant, some things aren't listed as sugars. Maltodextrin is finding itself into so many foods, and that's a refined kind of sweetener, and fake sweeteners, etc. These create energy in the mind that keep thoughts spinning quite manically. And the latest research is that diet seriously affects our mental health, whatever we intake, and even put on our skin. Our skin is an organ that absorbs things very quickly, goes into our system, into our bloodstream. So do some inquiries. It's experimental. What the days where you are able to rest at night more easily and that the anxiety isn't so strong and the thinking mind's so strong, just maybe keep a food diary or anything you put on your skin, anything you intake, and also about your activities, and particularly on the screen, watching movies or just computer work or just having the phone on is stimulating in various ways for the brain, for our neurology. So I'd encourage you a lot to experiment and see what works for you. What you say is chronic anxiety, as I was saying, a lot of research is now pointing to diet causing that. There's lots of stuff on YouTube you can hear, and lots of anecdotal evidence about people who've been diagnosed with anxiety or bipolar or other mental health disorders have completely recovered when they change their diet. So sometimes not easy, but well worth the experimenting. And, aside from those things, if you have a very busy mind, taking the time at night time before you go to bed to sit and meditate and just let that momentum settle. Keep the lights lowered at night so there's not really bright lights. That's all stimulating. Yeah, see how you go with that. So Steve asks for advice on how to cultivate patient endurance. Yeah, so patient endurance, the Pali word is kanti, and I sometimes turn that around to enduring patience, because patient endurance can give a sense of grit your teeth and bear it, which has a quality of tension for me. But if I turn it around and call it enduring patience, it's much softer and it feels more wholesome in my sense. But anyway, these are different translations of the Pali word kanti. And the Buddha said that kanti as a barami, as a great skill and merit, it is the highest spiritual austerity or spiritual discipline or spiritual quality or practice. So my sense of why he said that is because often people think of, these great feats as being the highest spiritual asceticism or discipline, psychic powers or ascetic practices, some really gung-ho, macho capacities to just bear with difficulty and pain. But actually, he was saying, the quality, the mind state of patient endurance or enduring patience, that ability to be patient just with what's arising. So this quality is something that we learn a lot in meditation because we keep meeting the habitual movement of mind, the wanting, the not wanting, the push, the pull, the habitual resisting, shutting down to pain, the desiring for something other than what's appearing right now. All of this movement, we need the quality of patience with, until we really see that this is just karmic momentum. And for a few moments, we learn to rest out of that, and this quality of equanimity appears. But then maybe that shuts down again when the attention gets caught in a strong stream of thinking that's captured our sense of this is important, this is a problem I've got to solve, and we're really kind of stuck on it. Patience is that ability to, okay, what's happening now? Can I just breathe with this? Just as it is in this moment. However, and whatever is happening. Now that at times can feel really difficult, maybe when we're facing into pain and strong restlessness. But even if we can't allow the body to settle, we can have the mind that says, this is just the experience of restlessness. Can I breathe with this? Does it have to be a problem? It's just as it is. So I use this phrase to teach and also have helped myself. Can I breathe with this, just as it is in this moment, whatever we're experiencing? So this is a way to come into presence and simultaneously cultivating that quality of patience, acceptance. And this in itself allows the mind to open out in a particular way, allows us to recognize more what's going on and how our responsiveness and reactions to what's appearing affects the very next moment, or affects what then arises in the mind or doesn't arise. So it's all about experimenting with this, Steve. So I hope those few points help. Jennifer asks, are there any insights you can offer me? I've had an extended virus, almost 4 months, and as spring approaches, I feel deep longing that I'm missing out on having the energy to get outside. Yeah, so perhaps what I've just exactly spoken about to Steve on this quality of patience, enduring patience, particularly with low energy, with illness. Can I breathe with this experience just as it is? Even the frustration of, I want to get out, I want to have more energy, but it's not there right now. Can I breathe with this experience just as it is in this moment? Just one breath, in breath and out breath. So we need to work with what is, bring our full awareness to what is, and then what we fear or expect or whatever dissolves. The desire to get out, the fear of not being able to get out, they're just thoughts which take you away, if you don't recognize them, take you away from pure presence and the ability just to be with. And you'll find a deep peace within those conditions when you're able to do this. And that deep peace is extremely healing for the body and mind. So patience with illness in this way is perhaps the remedy. Thank you. This meditation was incredibly beautiful. Thank you, Orange. I'm glad you found that so. I enjoyed it too. Mary says, my mind stays empty, still, and then moves with whatever. The observer can see this, but it takes time to settle back again, surrender into emptiness. This just goes on and on. It does, but just that last sentence, this just goes on and on. Is that a projection into an endless future of coming and resting, going out and resting? Very important to see subtle projections into the future, because each moment is fresh. And whilst we can say that this process of meditation is one of being still, and then the mind moves and we may lose a sense of stillness and awareness, and then we come back. Ultimately, as the mind's wisdom deepens in this process, this sense of stillness, even with movement, becomes more expanded. So movement doesn't become the problem. At first it feels like with movement, it's like this. We lose presence and we come back, lose presence, come back. But actually presence isn't lost, there's just a kind of obscuration. Something is obscured temporarily, that's all. When the wisdom factor is fully matured, this stillness becomes all pervasive, even with movement. So Ajahn Chah had this beautiful metaphor he put as a kind of koan. He said, have you ever seen still water? Have you ever seen flowing water? When the mind is peaceful, it is just like still flowing water. So I think this is a beautiful metaphor and a koan, because it's not within your rational conceptual mind to figure out, but it points to the experience of peace, that it's not stuck in stillness alone. The experience of true peace with wisdom. Very good. How relevant is reading texts compared to formal mindfulness practice with progression in the path? Well, reading can help us find the right view. not reading for its own sake to gain knowledge or to memorize anything, but to help disperse wrong view and to establish right view. Right view is always established in the present and sees things clearly for what they are. So reading or listening to enlightened teachings can be helpful in that regard. And that's why this channel, Wisdom of the Masters, is so useful for people to listen to these teachings, because often the listening can go under the conceptual mental processes that reading can sometimes keep engaged. So experiment with both. So it is relevant, and yet the mindfulness practice, even though it's hard, it's more about resting under thoughts of what we should do or shouldn't do, or what the path is or isn't. It's learning to rest in that pure presence. See thought as thought. Sometimes a thought can help it re-establish right view, which is about presence. So a few words or concepts can pop into the mind that helps attachment and ignorance, aversion in the moment, which is beautiful. But when we get caught up in a perpetual momentum of just thinking about practice, then as we're meditating, we need to see this not as wrong, but as just in that moment, it's habitual conceptualization. So resting out of that is the practice in formal meditation. To what extent am I responsible for the content of my mind? Well, we can talk about this in different ways, I guess. Because of the I, it's hard to talk about I. What do you mean I? How am I responsible? Because the sense of I is a constructed concept as well. Content of mind, we can actually say is, for the most part, conditioned processes. The construct of I is a conditioned process. So it's not that I'm not recommending abandoning all responsibility or sense of responsibility, but we have to see that one can say there's karmic momentum. So stuff that arises in the mind has a cause from beginningless time, really. But we just see that as habitual momentum. In this space, we learn to recognize, in our lives, what's wholesome and unwholesome on this level of thought and subsequent action. Because thought leads to speech and action most often. Action and speech doesn't usually come without the intention or the thought to speak or act. So this is where our responsibility lies in terms of how we engage what arises in the mind. Are we engaging content that is unhelpful, that is causing more suffering for myself and others? Or are we learning to let that stuff go, let that stuff be, not adding fuel to its momentum? And as we live our life engaging rather the intentions and thoughts that leading through speech and action actually bring qualities of wholesomeness for oneself and others, helpful conditions as we move through life. Helpful conditions are those which allow the mind to come into more clarity, more peace. Even, it doesn't mean that if we're not experiencing clarity or peace that I'm to blame. Not at all. There is so much karmic momentum, but we have to learn what's worth picking up and what's worth just letting go, or what's not worth picking up. And when I say pick up, it's engaging with full awareness, not just habitually picking up and identifying with it. So this is a process, Paul, but I hope those few things of what I said can help you in your contemplations on this. In terms of what arises in the mind in meditation, I practice to see those things as just karmic momentum. If I identify with them, if I identify with a thought that, with an unwholesome, unhelpful thought, I just suffer. If I learn to just let it move through the mind and not pick it up, there's no suffering about that. That's the path. How can we monetarily support your monastery and how the funds used? Curious what life is like where you reside. So myself we're just living in a small house we call a hermitage, myself and Venerable Jayasara. And really it's just a private nun's residence, so it's not a large monastery. We don't have a lot of overheads, but people who like to donate usually do that through Jayasara's YouTube channel, through Patreon or a PayPal. If they want to donate towards, it just covers overheads, the basic requisites, and keeps things going. Or there's other ways to donate, which we've detailed also on the website, theveghermitage.com. Yeah, so we don't have a lot of overheads, which is great, being just a small place. And we also are able to support some other monastics in different monastic situations when we have the means to do so as well. So thank you for inquiring. So someone's saying they listen to Seminary Jayasara's meditations before bed and it has a great impact on consciousness, which is great. And that is another way to settle down, that question earlier, to settle the mind down before bed. That's often a time when I'm listening to Dharma as well, to the wisdom of the masters. It's great to set your mind, to set the priorities of your mind and to let go of just extraneous thinking and mental movement. Okay, a lot of people expressing gratitude. You're most welcome. We'll just take a few more questions. I think. Thank you for your time and wisdom. Great way to start my day. Terrific. Great, Alana. Flory's asking, in my experience, not me that comes back, but the attention. The presence is always there, immutable. That's right. That's right. It doesn't come and go. The attention comes and goes because of all conditions. Thank you for being here and sharing the spiritual vitamins. Yes, that's right. Good. That's the way of putting it. That's like, I like to put it like that too. Attention gets funneled off into conceptual constructs, and it's not that presence is lost, but there's momentary occluding. But one wakes up in a moment, instantly. It's interesting. It's very hard to put words on these processes, and that's why you get so many different words describing the path of practice in various ways. And at times it becomes, it's not rational. It's very hard to describe with language because of this. The waking up process and the actual innate nature of mind is a timeless reality, and words and concepts engage kind of and construct dualistic notions, time-bound frameworks. So yeah, whatever wakes us up and allows that suffering to just dissolve in the moment is good. Great. The observer is the observed, due to Krishnamurti, all within the same field of thought. Indeed, the observer, the observed, and the observing are one. Question: where does imagination play a part in our practice, where it's not papancha? Well, I don't know, maybe that's a question, a kind of a koan to take into your own practice. Where does imagination play a part in our practice? Is it ever not papancha? Ever not? Papancha means mental proliferation. You know, imagination is often part of the wandering mind, part of the futurizing, the mind that futurizes, conceives, dreams. But sometimes in pure presence, that quality of imagination can just throw up beautiful metaphoric understanding. So perhaps that's where I would see imagination, not in its papancha style or driven by desire and ignorance, but arising out of pure perception, pure wisdom, or as the Dzogchen practitioners would say, pure responsiveness or spontaneity. But it's not proliferating conceptualism, it's just perhaps the way the wisdom mind can express itself. Amanda says, enduring patience. The switch of words is profound and very helpful. Thank you. You're welcome, Amanda. Who is the one thinking you have that mind? Oh, Eric's asking Mary. Reverend Dillis, sometimes I find it very helpful to identify something as worldly, and sometimes that itself becomes dualistic. It does. Letting go of worldly attachments has helped me a lot. Yeah, so that's say in this respect, in this context, that's perhaps a function of discernment in the path, which is a kind of a way of, rather than separating worldly from spiritual, it's a way of discerning, is this worth putting energy to in this context, in my life, within this path right now, what's worth giving attention to? So often for monastics, this languaging of worldly and spiritual comes into play a lot, and so they become memes, for worldly is just something that's not worth putting attention into. But perhaps at a later time we might see this splitting, conceptual splitting, as something that isn't necessary, because what appears is just what's appearing. What ceases is just what's ceasing. Whether or not we call it worldly, spiritual, worthwhile, unworthwhile, each has its place, I think, as does the various decisions we have to make. As I was referring earlier about what's worth picking up in terms of thought leading to speech and action, there's discernment of wholesome and unwholesome. That's a function of wisdom as we cultivate the path. One can see this level of discernment as mundane, and that the Buddha referred to as that, as it's not necessarily transcendent discernment, but it has a true and real function on the path and brings welfare, benefit into this worldly experience, this samsaric experience, benefit for self and others. But some level, when the mind becomes quite refined, those discernments, kind of dualistic way of discerning, just drops away. It's not that we have to decide one way or the other. Do you listen to music? Usually only the music, the ambient music that Samaneri Jayasara puts behind her Wisdom of the Masters tracks. So otherwise I don't. But thank you for sharing your words of experience, wisdom, understanding the path. You're welcome, Eliza. Thank you for sharing. Everyone's saying thank you. Thank you for listening. A most important aspect of the sharing. How does one know how to act in this world rightly, alongside the tension of pushing oneself to do what they think is beneficial for themselves? So I think the answer I gave earlier about contemplating what's wholesome and unwholesome for oneself, what's worth acting on, not worth acting on, what brings benefit for others, to the world, to oneself, and what doesn't, what brings more suffering. These contemplations begin to shape and develop right view. In the way that you put your sentence, alongside the tension of pushing oneself to do what they think is beneficial, I would look at the tension one is feeling internally and just seeing where that's coming from, because the they have become a superego voice internally. So it's not, it's the pressure is coming from within. So learning how to recognize that and relax out of that, one frees the mind to discern more clearly what's appropriate, what's wholesome, what's responsive, in a way that brings. Lovely. I think we're coming to the end of our question. Is right action tension-less? I can't say. I think it is. It would be in its ultimate sense. But sometimes our tension, the tension we feel, is just pointing to a conflict within ourselves. Whether or not we can have right action whilst that tension may be there, I'm not sure. I can't be absolutely categorical one way or the other. But when there is tension there, it's worth looking into to relax. Sometimes the world, our life is moving so fast and we have to respond quite quickly. But the more we recognize how to relax his body, mind in any situation, I think that allows our mind to see more clearly as we're making decisions in the world and acting. Noisy says the translation of our DNA is love. Recognize it, let it go, let it fly. It will do the rest. Let us watch things change before our very eyes with new creations for thoughts. Surprise. Very poetic, thank you. Okay. Is Dharma exclusive to Buddhist practitioners, or can Dharma be unknowingly spoken or shown by non-Buddhists? Absolutely. Dharma, depending on the way you translate it, it can be the truth of the way things are, reality, and it can also be the teaching, someone's teaching of that reality or the way it is. So although Dharma was a very common word used in the Indic tradition, these meanings of reality, truth, the way it is, the way it really is, the nature of things, the true nature of things, that's quite universal. The writings of Ursula K. Le Guin always seem to ring in my mind when listening to sutras. Absolutely. And if you listen to the various playlists on the wisdom of the masters representing the different traditions, East and West, you will recognize also very closely, some of them very closely remind you of the sutras. Sometimes using similar words, translated words, sometimes quite different. But this is where you see that the wisdom of the realized ones are pointing to that same truth, the true nature of reality. And sometimes it's just described in a different way, or the path, the way of realization is described in different ways. These are just different teachers offering different skillful means according to the way they've understood and realized it. But what they're pointing to is that one truth, which is revealed perhaps in many ways through our own conditioned mind. So we've arrived at the end of this session. Thank you. I wish you all great health, happiness, well-being, and peace. If that's not your experience now, let it be, let it go. We can have well-being, happiness, peace in the face of adversity, surprisingly, in the face of pain, in the face of things not going the way we want them. And this is the potential freedom to be found. So, bless you all. Please join us again in 2 weeks. Samaneri Jayasara will lead the next session. And in the meantime, go well, be well, and take care. Bye for now.